Behind me is an island that doesn't exist. That's why there's nothing there. It's a phantom island. This is a story about ghosts, exploration, copyright, and the CIA. Phantom islands don't exist, but let's get into them anyway. Hi, I'm Dylan, you're watching Not Exactly Normal, and this is most certainly not the Isle of Demons, because the Isle of Demons is an island that, despite existing on official maps for around 150 years, doesn't actually exist. But let's back up. Centuries before Google Maps made it easy for me to navigate to the straightest fence in North York, good old-fashioned maps were big business for anyone looking to go, well, anywhere.
Through the intervening centuries, map information has grown with ever-increasing rapidity. More power to those first explorers and early pioneers who crossed strange oceans, blazed new trails, discovered new lands, new mountains, new rivers, new forests, and recorded their findings for the benefit of those to follow.
Maps became especially crucial during the Age of Exploration, when Europeans set out over the seas to discover, conquer, and colonize new territories. This period, lasting from roughly the 15th to 17th century, was a time of great change, where globalization came to the forefront and different cultures and civilizations mixed much more than they had previously. As more set out into the sea and over land, maps became more and more accurate, with more explorers being able to verify new lands. Soon, maps would transform from the guesswork of antiquity to resemble the much more accurate maps that we have today. Theories about what lay beyond the horizon would be proven, or in most cases, disproven. Like Terra Australis, a continent that was thought to exist as early as the time of Aristotle. They thought that because the northern hemisphere had so much landmass that the southern hemisphere would need an equal amount, otherwise the globe would risk falling over. The blank corners of the map were being filled in by an exponential increase in seafaring explorers. And it was during this awkward period of geographical documentation that mistakes were made and falsehoods committed. While much of the world came into focus, many ghost islands appeared on these maps at the same time. These phantom islands didn't exist and were documented either by mistake or deception, or my personal favorite, as copyright traps.
Show me the island. Show me where does it lie in the ocean. Show it to me.
While you might think that this is just a story about the inaccuracies of the past, a lot of these phantom islands existed until quite recently, with several of them actually being listed on Google Maps as real islands.
By the time they find us, we'll all be dead.
You may have heard of some of these. Atlantis is probably the most famous phantom island, a fake island likely created purely as a fiction by a Greek philosopher in 360 BCE that to this day people still believe lies sunken at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean.
But have you not heard of Atlantis? My dear fellow, the mistress of Atlantis, a goddess, a beautiful woman, a magnificent woman. That's Sanity, sir.
A goddess?
Yes.
I'm on the eastern coast of Canada, in Newfoundland, which was a bit of a hotspot for phantom islands, as it was the first place that European settlers landed when they got to Canada. And due to its positioning on the outside of the mouth of the St. Lawrence, if you wanted to get into the interior of the country, you had to pass by Newfoundland. And so it became a popular stop for the ever-popular trade route between Europe and Canada. The island that isn't behind me was called the Isle of Demons, and it appeared on official maps as early as 1508. I'd turn around to show you, but it's so windy, and the only thing blocking the wind from ruining this recording is my body. At least I hope. I can't really tell. It was named for the supposed evil spirits that a French priest/explorer encountered when he was there. It is so windy that yet another one of my microphones has died. My camera keeps dying, everything's plugged into a USB power bank. Oh my God. Satanic islands were somewhat common in the North Atlantic. Another example is Satan's Ease. It's not how you pronounce that, but that's what I'm going with. Satan's Ease was another island in the North Atlantic that supposedly was possessed by demons. Why were there so many satanic islands in the North Atlantic? Well, the theory is that the weather here is pretty awful and can lead to some pretty horrific storms, and naming certain hotspots after demons was a sure way to ward off the more superstitious. which was like everybody back then. So with that, I think I'm gonna come back tomorrow when hopefully it's a bit less windy. Okay, I'm back. Now, where were we? Right, the Isle of Demons.
Look there, Gary, over there.
Land.
The Isle of Demons story was popularized by a rich woman named Marguerite de la Roque, who apparently was stranded there by her uncle after he found out that she was pregnant and sleeping with a common sailor. Preyed upon by wild animals, neither the sailor, her handmaiden, or the baby survived. But Marguerite was rescued and returned to France, where she gained fame for the story. The island stayed on official maps until around the 17th century, when it was removed because nobody could find it.
The island of Moto was another phantom island that was thought to exist somewhere in the North Atlantic.
But unlike other phantom islands, Moto was documented many times by many different explorers. The mystery of its location was finally solved in 1948 when an American vessel passed over its supposed coordinates and decided to take a depth measuring, only to find that Moto had sunken just below the surface of the sea. While some geologic event may have sunk the island of Moto, many phantom islands ended up on maps purely by mistake. Mirage and Fata Morgana are real problems at sea. These illusions that can make the horizon appear to show land can do a lot to tempt a sailor who's already been told of an uncharted island in the area. One phantom island named Crockerland was said to be located in the Arctic, and an explorer by the name of Robert Edwin Peary spent 5 days chasing what his native guide had already pointed out was just a mirage. To the south of Newfoundland was the supposed golden city of Norumbega. It turned out to be a lie and is where Maine is today. But a big part of its appeal is something that a lot of explorers use to hype up fake islands: gold.
A hardy frontier, far from the paths of civilization, where fortune beckoned with a glittering smile and life hung on the quickness of a trigger finger. There was gold in them thar hills.
Sea exploration was expensive, and you often had to secure private investors, and to get those, you needed something worth investing in. This is where a lot of the Phantom Islands originated. The promise of new land is tempting to investors, but more so is the promise of riches. And so many of these newly discovered islands were said to be overburdened with gold. Many supposedly even had dirt that was made up of 2 parts soil and 1 part gold. I cannot believe how many people fell for the promise of gold on undiscovered islands over and over again. Just how many golden paradises did people think existed in the world? One great example of this is California. First off, they thought it was an island for some reason. Secondly, they thought it was an island only inhabited by beautiful women. And thirdly, they thought the only metal on the island paradise of California was gold. While these explorers' exaggerated claims of riches in lands unknown are morally dubious at best, this was also a time of straight-up scams. Many islands were invented purely to profit or bolster the explorer's image. The most famous of these was done by a man named Gregor McGregor. He invented a country in Central America, around where Panama is today, named Poye.
He then sold land deeds and official government titles to British elites for around £11 each.
Eager to settle this newfound paradise, the settlers arrived only to find, well, nothing. It was all a con. They were expecting a settled city and thus didn't have the resources that they would need to survive in such a rugged environment. And so of the 270 or so that set out from England, only 50 survived. McGregor never faced any consequences for this horrific con and lived out his days in Venezuela. Here, off the coast of Iceland, was the scene of another cartographic scam led by the Zeno brothers of Venice. They claim to have gone on a 7-year adventure in which they discovered an island in the middle of the North Atlantic that they named Frislanda, as well as several of its neighboring islands. They claim to have waged war on behalf of the King of Frislanda and conquered said nearby islands. How anyone believed there was a series of civilized island nations in the middle of the increasingly trafficked North Atlantic that hadn't been discovered yet is beyond me. Though their scam was eventually figured out when people back home discovered legal documents showing that one of the brothers was on trial in Venice for embezzlement when he was supposedly waging war in Frislanda. I guess he got his dates mixed up. It's now thought that the brothers based their fictional tale of Frislanda on the very real country of Iceland. Another famous con artist among explorers was Benjamin Morel. He was nicknamed the biggest liar in the Pacific after he invented a whole bunch of islands that remained on official maps for around 50 years until they were purged
around the turn of the 20th century. The most recent map that I can find that still has some of them is from 1939. Though since he invented so many islands, they took a long time to verify, and in 1910, the international dateline was actually redrawn around Morel's self-titled Phantom Island, Morel's Island, to include it in the same time zone as Hawaii, as they thought it was a real island that belonged to them.
The Falkland Islands also fell victim to a similar scam, though on a much smaller scale. They were discovered by some buccaneers in 1683 who noted their discovery in their journal. Their journal was later published by a man named William Hackey, who named these islands Pepys Islands in order to curry favor with the Secretary of the Admiralty of the British Royal Navy, Samuel Pepys. But the weird thing is that later on in their journal, the buccaneers noted that they made a mistake and that these new islands were actually just the Falkland Islands that they misidentified, making them not new at all. Despite this strange veiling of the truth, Pepys Island remained on maps for around 200 years. Greenland also fell victim to deception, though with somewhat better intentions. It's thought that Greenland was named so, despite the fact that it's covered in ice, because the original Vikings that settled there were hoping that a more lush-sounding name might entice some of their Viking relatives back in Scandinavia to move there, join them, and settle. But my favorite lighthearted map-related con came from a Spanish explorer by the name of Pedro Sarmiento. He claimed that the painter who painted a map of Magellan Strait included a few fake islands just to please his wife, who had asked him to name a country after her. He obliged, and so the fake Painter's Wife Islands were born and documented. The impact of these errors and deceptions can still be felt today. A phantom island off the coast of Australia named Sandy Island, which was discovered in 1774 by James Cook, was seen on Google Maps as recently as 2012. This is because Google uses a combination of satellite imagery and good old-fashioned maps to build their Google Maps platform, and sometimes a few phantom islands slip through. One of the most infamous of these involved the CIA. Sort of. The Phantom Island of Bermejo was thought to be located in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was brought to the floor of the Mexican Senate in the year 2000. Why? Well, they thought that it was sunk. On purpose. By the CIA. But again, why? Oil. It's always about oil. Basically, in maritime law, the 322 kilometers of water in front of a country belongs to that country, including everything in the water, like oil. And so an island located in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico that belonged to Mexico would extend Mexico's rights over oil in the Gulf significantly.
This island first appeared on maps in 1539, and its most recent appearance was in 1921. Conspiracy theorists and apparently senators in Mexico held on to the notion that this island was in fact real, and the only reason that it was no longer there was because the CIA had detonated a bomb on it and destroyed it. Though they did end up conceding that an explosion large enough to destroy an island would not have gone unnoticed.
And so another theory was presented. The CIA shaved down the island to just below sea level, presumably in the middle of the night. Though unlike the sunken island of Maida, no one's found a trace of Bermeja lurking beneath the surface in the Gulf of Mexico. While researching this episode, I had read a lot about how phantom islands were used as copyright traps. Essentially, if your whole business is making maps that anyone can buy and anyone can copy, one way you can protect your work is by including little fakeries on your maps, and if you spot one of your fakeries on one of your competitors' maps, you can sue them. This was done as fake streets called trap streets and fake towns called paper towns, as well as fake islands. In fact, I was very disappointed to find that there's very little information out there about which islands were created as a scam or by mistake, and which ones were created as copyright traps. There is a bit more information about trap streets and paper towns, like the very famous paper town in New York called Agloe, which was the sort of subject of a John Green book called Paper Towns. If only John Green would write a book about phantom islands, I could have all my questions answered. Please, John, you're our only hope. In fact, this book, which is all about phantom islands, The Phantom Atlas by Edward Brooke Hitching, only mentions phantom islands as copyright traps a total of once in the introduction, and then very frustratingly, he never shows an example of a phantom island that's a copyright trap in the actual body of the book. It's very frustrating, but it's a very good book, and if you want a deeper dive into the world of phantom islands, you should check it out. Somehow, copyright protection is denser and more mysterious than the vast ocean filled with mirage, madness, and misidentification. That is, if these islands indeed ever originated as copyright protections at all. Perhaps it was just a way for one to save face after misidentifying a mirage. Lost lands have fascinated us for centuries, and they'll continue to do so. Some of my favorite movies, books, TV shows, and video games have leaned heavily into the Phantom Island narrative. Lost, Uncharted, King Kong, The Curse of the Golden Idol, and many other great works of fiction have been heavily inspired by these mistakes and misdirections. As we more accurately map the globe, less and less of these Phantom Islands will remain, washing away an era of wild speculation, optimism, and deception that thought it left its mark on the globe, but as it turns out, most decidedly did not. So what should I talk about next? Please let me know in the comments, and if you like this sort of thing, please consider subscribing for new episodes around once a month. Also, I do have a Patreon you can check out, which, with your support, I can continue to make episodes like this, where I go to Newfoundland and learn all about the Phantom Islands in the North Atlantic. Your support on Patreon means I can continue working on this channel full-time. Thanks so much for watching.
Believe me, dear friend, there is no greater ecstasy, nothing more sacred than to die for a woman like that.